What's up, my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! In Business Casual. No fear, the Banlist According to Logic video number 1 is coming this afternoon, but I figured after a little bit of conversation in yesterday's video, I want to clarify a couple of things because I feel like I didn't give you guys the explanation that I feel like I could for my reasoning that Burning Abyss has surpassed Dragon Rulers in the world of dominance over its meta. So I want to go over a couple of points that were made in the comment section, and then I want to explain better what I was talking about, because I feel like a little bit of my discussion yesterday was focused more on comparing Burning Abyss versus Dragon Rulers as decks and not necessarily comparing them as figures in the meta. Some people in the comments section said that Burning Abyss are terrible because you can beat them with your 6 Samurai or Fire Fist. Yes, I suppose that if I believed this for a minute, that would probably mean that Burning Abyss is terrible. However, seeing as I have yet to see a single Fire Fist or 6 Samurai deck top in the last month and a half, I can't really say that that is plausible. That being said, even if it were true that you could beat Burning Abyss all the time with your 6 Samurai or Fire Fist, it doesn't matter because Fire Fist and 6 Samurai are not a significant part of this meta, and therefore they are not relevant when discussing how dominant Burning Abyss is over the current meta. Some commenters criticize that they don't actually believe that Burning Abyss nor Dragon Rulers are Tier 0 decks, saying something like there have only been a couple of Tier 0 decks in history, or that Tier 0 decks are decks that you absolutely have to play in order to top an event. Now, this is a fairly legitimate piece of criticism because, as usual in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, we are discussing a very subjective term. There isn't actually a scientific definition for Tier 0 in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The operating definition that I am working with of Tier 0 works like this. I believe that Tier 1 decks are decks that consistently top at a fairly even rate. For instance, Burning Abyss, Shadow, and Satellar Knights in the earlier part of the Duelist Alliance format. I don't actually believe in Tier 0.5, I only believe that there is a better of the Tier 1 decks, but if I did believe in a Tier 0.5, I would say that it is a deck that consistently gets a plurality of tops. That doesn't mean that it gets the majority, it means that it gets more tops than each of the other decks as opposed to all of the other decks. For instance, I would say that if Clifforts consistently got 30% of the tops, and Shadows consistently got 30% of the tops, and then Burning Abyss consistently got 40% of the tops, I would say that Burning Abyss is a Tier 0.5 deck. If I believed that were true, I generally don't believe in Tier 0.5. I call a deck Tier 0 when it gets the majority of tops consistently, when it gets over 50% of tops at each event. I generally consider that to be Tier 0, particularly, as in the case of Burning Abyss, when that deck has almost all of the slots in the top 4 or the top 8, or some kind of sweep of the top tables. So back to Dragon Rulers versus Burning Abyss. One of the most important reasons why I would say that Burning Abyss has a stronger presence in its meta than Dragon Rulers is because Burning Abyss does not have any bad matchups in its format, so to speak. In their summer format, Dragon Rulers had a bad matchup against spellbooks. They tended to have fairly good side deck cards, and they were a much more popular deck than spellbooks, which is why they tended to do better as a whole at the general events. But spellbooks generally won game 1 against Dragon Rulers, and Dragon Rulers would have to struggle through their games 2 and 3. In the fall format, Dragon Rulers had tons of bad matchups against Evil Swarms and Constellars, and against 4-Axis Fire Fist with their easy ability to make Crimson Blader. Dragon Rulers had tons of bad matchups in the fall format, just those decks tended to be less popular than Dragon Rulers, and Dragon Rulers had a better general event than those decks, meaning that their matchups against most of the decks they were going to be facing that day were going to be better than those decks' matchups against most of the decks they were going to be facing that day. Burning Abyss, on the other hand, has no such thing. Shadows are supposedly a bad matchup for Burning Abyss, but with Fire Lake and Virgil in the game, they have easy outs to every problem that Shadows present to them. But Burning Abyss tends to have a really good Cliffort matchup and an amazing Satellar Knight matchup, and there aren't really any other decks in the meta right now. You aren't seeing any other decks top, which brings me to my second point. The The Tier 2 presence against Burning Abyss is weak, and the Rogue presence is non-existent. In the Dragon Rulers first format, they had a really strong Tier 2 presence because the Tier 2 was spellbooks, basically. Spellbooks took about 40% of slots in the tops of events like Regionals and YCS, while Dragon Rulers were taking about 60% of the slots. Currently, Burning Abyss is taking 10 out of the top 16 at ARGCS Chicago, and I think that they're going to do just as well, if not better, at the next event. In the fall format of Dragon Rulers, Rogue decks had an extremely strong presence. There were all sorts of Rogue decks that had good outs to Dragon Rulers. So you would see at the top tables things like 4-Axis, Firefist, Evil's Form, Constellar, Spellbooks, Mermails. You would see all sorts of Rogue decks at the top table, and a really strong Tier 2 against Dragon Rulers. There is no Rogue deck presence in the game right now. Every single deck that tops is in the top 4, if not just the top 3. My final point is a little bit of a reiteration of what I said yesterday. Both Burning Abyss and Dragon Rulers face the same number of answers in every game. There's about an equal number of floodgates popular in the meta right now as there were against Dragon Rulers. The difference is that Burning Abyss is basically made of outs. Fire Lake is an out for every problem that Burning Abyss runs into. The only problem for Burning Abyss that can't be solved with Fire Lake is Flying Sea, and that can be solved easily by tributing it for Vanity's Fiend and putting your own floodgate on the board. So there, I hope, is a better explanation of why I say that Burning Abyss is a stronger deck in its meta than the Dragon Rulers. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you did, let me know why in the comment section below, and discuss whether or not you think this was an accurate depiction of the meta today and the meta back then, and whether or not you accept the point. We can disagree, and that would be totally cool as long as you don't say that you win with like Dragoonity or something all the time. That's just a little bit silly. Meanwhile, of course, subscribe for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Thank you guys for watching. I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and I will see you at the Banlist According to Logic. I got a jet.